На трибунах аллеют знамена, облака в поднебесье плывут. На зеленом ковре стадиона разноцветные майки цветут.
Hello and welcome back to a special episode of the RFN Podcast. In our third European Club Preview Special, I'm your host as always, James Nichols, and this week I'm joined by Ricky Menendez of both Esto es Atleti, a weekly podcast on all things Los Rojiblancos, and Maneras De Vivir, a weekly Atleti radio show. So good morning, Ricky.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. I'm not too bad at all. I'm a little bit excited for this one, and of course, Atleti and Lokomotiv know each other incredibly well over the last few years. This is, of course, the third time in 4 years that Atleti and Loko have been drawn together in either the Europa League quarterfinals or Champions League group stages. And unsurprisingly, Atleti have won all four of these previous occasions with an aggregate scoreline of 12-1. Now, before this run of fixtures, the pair had only ever played once before in history, and that was a 3-3 draw in the single-legged 2007-8 Champions League group stages. So if we just jump straight into it, Atleti are currently second in the group, having lost to Bayern in the opening game week, and then rather expectantly defeating RB Salzburg. So how have Atleti played in these two games?
Well, the thing is that the Champions League stint so far has been quite disappointing for Atletico. We've accumulated probably the two worst games of the season in terms of creating football and being a decent rival for the other side. Especially the Bayern Munich game was terrible, a night to forget for all the Atletico players, and I think that the feeling that I got when we faced Lokomotiv and other matches is that the difference is probably much narrower than the 12-1 aggregate that you were talking about. I think that the same thing applies to the Bayern Munich Atletico match. Atletico is used to being a more competitive side, and it was rather surprising for Atletico fans to walk away with that 4-0 that is so painful for a club that is not used to receiving so many goals at all. So regarding the game against Salzburg, I was expecting that to be a comfortable match because we played against their, let's say their bigger brothers, the Leipzig, the Red Bull Leipzig in the Champions League, and we know how bad that went for Atletico. And I was expecting the team to be much more competitive, much more intelligent in the way they face the opponent's tactical scheme. But the thing is that Atletico was never comfortable in that match, and despite coming away with a win, which was absolutely necessary for Atletico's aspirations in the competition, which are to try to squeeze themselves in at least in the last 8. That would be everything that goes beyond the last 16 would be acceptable. If you pass the last 8, it starts to smell like success, and that's where Atletico's comfort zone is. So having so many problems in the group stage is not a sign of good times to come for this group stage qualification. So I'm not very sure whether Atletico Madrid is going to present their best side, because even though in Liga, in the domestic competition, it is being a very competitive team, it does seem to have problems finding its feet on European soil.
Yeah, and it could be perhaps that Atletico are one of those teams where, as they progress in the competition, they perhaps grow with confidence.
I don't know. In the case of Atletico is normally very used to starting off very strong, slumping tremendously around November, December, barely surviving the January stretch, and then coming back very strong at the end of the year. Atletico has faced a lot of renovation in the last times, and they're struggling in certain key positions. Pay attention to the backs, to both the left back and especially the right back. Kieran Trippier is he's a Spurs player. You probably know him very well. he's
Yeah.
struggling tremendously this year. He was quite good when he first arrived. Started to fall back in his performance, and this year he's being highly criticized because of his lack of defensive performance more than
Mhm.
his offensive capacity to add to the squad. People are starting to doubt whether Trippier is a future starter or if he's a player that Atletico should find a replacement in the starting position. It's gotten that bad.
Mhm. To be honest, that's not too surprising to hear, especially considering he is playing week in, week out for England during internationals, and
Mhm.
Gareth Southgate does have a proclivity to play players who are, let's say, out of form at best quite a lot of the time. But that's something I've got a little bit of a question on that, but I'll get to that in a quick second. But first of all, it's Simeone.
Mhm.
So how is Diego Simeone faring in charge of late? Of course, been there for a very long time now, and I won't expect Atleti to line up like this against Loko, but in general, say in the Bayern game, do they still play in the same sort of industrial and quite defensive first style?
Um, I doubt that because Europe, and I think that's probably the key to why they struggle in Europe because while in the domestic championship they have an expectation of what type of rivals they're going to face and what type of problems they're going to have. It's just a different story when you face European rivals that you're not used to playing against, and you're not very sure what
Yeah.
type of style they're going to play. They're going to use, and Simeone has changed the way that he starts the team. For example, the Bayern Munich team, match was absolutely surprising because Atletico is normally very conservative when it comes to visiting the bigger stages and visiting the rivals that are that are very powerful, like Bayern Munich, and in the hope of not conceding too many goals and having an opportunity to come away with a win or a draw at the end of the match. But Simona didn't do that against Bayern Munich, and was very brave and tried to play a match trying to um, beat Bayern Munich to the possession of the ball, and that was not a good idea, and it did not come out
Wow.
well. And that's a reflection of the score of that match against Salzburg. There were like phases where Atletico was trying to be dominant and Salzburg was trying to resist against that dominance. At the end of the day, Atletico was had a better end of the match to the beginning of the match, which was quite terrible. I would say that against Lokomotiv, probably they're going to play very much in Atletico style, a
Yeah.
quite conservative first half, and then try to play a very strong beginning of the second half, and try to come away with the game at the beginning of the second half. That's the typical Atletico style to uh,
Mhm.
be very conservative, to draw back the offensive line to very close to their own box, and in the second half to be more offensive and try to press the rival close to their box and try to come away with balls that are dangerous close to the defending goalkeeper.
Mhm. That's definitely interesting to hear because Lokomotiv themselves in European competition are very much defence first. It's all about uh, packing the defence as much as possible, sitting back, as of course against the teams that they are drawn with. There's only one choice to do that.
That's probably the reason why they're unsuccessful against Atletico, because when Atletico senses that a team would do something like that, they do take advantage of a team that sets back, and Atletico does have talented players that can um, get the team ahead with one or two goals. And when Lokomotiv has to change their style and play Atletico in a different way, that's where Atletico is really going to go for the kill. And
Yeah.
that's Atletico's speciality. If a team is it makes any type of mistakes in terms of not pressing high enough or not trying to get Atletico into their into a defensive stance. If they have to stretch out and be offensive and they don't have to worry so much about defending, they're going to be very effective when it comes to scoring. And once they're ahead, Atletico is well known for not conceding many goals.
Yeah, yeah, of course. As I mentioned, in these 4 games of late, Loko have only scored once against Atletico, and
Yeah,
to be honest, although Loko played well against Bayern, Bayern's high line because Bayern's high line is so high up the pitch, the defenders are basically playing on the halfway line for the majority of games that they're playing, and a lot of the time that pins teams back. But Loko actually consider themselves a little bit uh, aggrieved not to have gotten a point against Bayern, which sounds crazy
wow.
because Bayern is so good right now. But they've really exposed Bayern's high defensive line and got in behind that very well. Nikolic, the manager, played 2 right backs on the right hand side in like a Christmas tree formation, and those 2 right backs just every
But I
time they
have
got the
to
ball
say
just
that
ran.
I've had the opportunity to see 4 matches against Loko and 2 of them at the Metropolitano Stadium, and they don't
Mm,
seem to be a bad team at all. So that's why the results are so confusing in terms of the type of team that you see. I think it's rather that. The style that Lokomotiv plays against certain teams is very beneficial
mm,
for Atletico style, and they take advantage of that flaw in Lokomotiv's defending style. So I'm not surprised at all. For example, Atletico's result against Bayern is a fluke. It shouldn't have happened. Atletico's never.
yeah.
I think it's only the second time in 10 years under Simeone's helm that Atletico has conceded 4 goals in a European match, and that's only happened once in the domestic championship.
Yeah, it seemed like to with respect to Simeone, it seemed like a little bit of a mistake to try and match Bayern up in that way. And knowing Simeone, he already will have learned from that straight away and probably will rectify that for the next time the two sides play. But is there well, largely Simeone has relied on quite a similar core of players for some time now, but Atleti did sign some high-profile players in the summer, such as Lucas Torreira on loan from Arsenal and Luis Suarez from Barca. So I just wondered how some of these new signings are fitting into Simeone's
I'm very
team.
excited about Lucas Torreira. I have to say that he's extremely low profile in Spain.
Mm,
Barely, no one knew about him when he was going to be signed, and I have to say that he's going to be such a surprise for people because I I have watched Lucas Torreira play, and I love his style. He's going to
yeah.
be exactly the gladiator that Atletico needs in the midfield and cover what the type of players that Atletico has always had in the midfield, like Gabi. I don't know if you remember from other
Mm,
previous
yeah,
matchups.
of course.
I think that Lucas Torreira really fits that style. And having lost Thomas Partey to Arsenal, I don't think it's an exact match. We're not getting Lucas Torreira instead of Thomas. Thomas is I think he's a more box to box player, and Lucas Torreira is just a bulldog that gets things done in midfield and doesn't allow um, any of the of the offensive game to start in the rival. So that's going to free up Koke, and I think that's the real contribution that Torreira is going to provide to Atletico. The Lucas Torreira plus Koke formula is an instant success because Koke was doing too much for what was expected from him, and he was
Mm,
just getting worn out every single match, running 10, 11, 12 kilometers per match, and that's just exhausting. There's no way a player can perform at
wow.
peak performance. And the same thing was happening with Saul. So I think that both Saul and Koke, very important youth talent players from Atletico's academy, are going to benefit
Mm,
tremendously from Lucas Torreira's contribution. I really think that he's going to stay. That's my personal bet, even if it's a 1 year loan deal and he's supposed to go back. I think that Atletico is going to press very hard to keep him. And regarding Luis Suarez, well, he's an extremely talented player. he just sees where the goal is going to be, where the opportunity is going to be, where he has to place himself inside the box. But he's 33, and he is coming back from a very serious injury. In fact, I've been watching him during these last matches, and he sort of limps a bit when he's not in the center of the action. So I'm not very sure whether he's ever going to fully recover from last season's injury that were so devastating for his physique. And I don't know if they're going to be threatening for the longevity of his career.
Yeah, of course, he's getting to the wrong end of 30 now, where these
Exactly.
sort of injuries are just not kind in the body
For Atletico,
whatsoever.
he's a perfect player. I mean, getting the opportunity
Yeah.
to sign a player like Suarez or Cavani, one of those players that that Atletico was negotiating with, that's just a dream come true. It's a match made in heaven for Atletico, and Atletico are going to benefit of having a talented striker that really gets the job done. That Atletico hasn't had ever since the days that Diego Costa left for Chelsea, and the Diego Costa that we got back is a completely different player, for sure.
Oh, good. Yeah, I was just about to ask about Diego Costa because,
He's
of course,
currently injured, but
yeah,
that's been the story with Diego Costa. He's been constantly in and out of injuries, and he's never reached that type of performance. Fernando Torres and Morata and Mandzukic and Kalinic and all the players that have tried to fill that number 9 role, that striker role, have all they haven't reached that expectation. And once Griezmann was gone, and the amount of goals that Griezmann added to the tally, and that made things work. At the end of the day, it was Griezmann not being the striker, but scoring so many goals that it really didn't matter whether the striker was performing at peak performance. Now that Griezmann has been out of the picture for 2 seasons, that's when you've really started to notice the lack of having a goal scorer that contributes with 20-25 goals per season, because that's not this Diego Costa that we have right now, and it's definitely not the Morata that went to Juventus. Fans are in general disappointed with Morata's performance at Atletico, and they were more than willing to welcome Luis Suarez with open arms.
Yeah, so of course, in lieu of Costa's injury, and I believe that Yannick Carrasco is also out injured. Who would
Yes.
Atletico's danger be for the tie?
Well, I think that Joao Felix is the name to mention here. Is Atletico's future is based, and I think it'll be built around Joao Felix's talent. He's a different player. He reminds me to players like Paulo Futre from the 90s, or uh, I think he's that type of player that you have problems describing exactly whether he's a striker, a winger. He's a bit of everything, and he's definitely called to be the leader of Atletico. And I think that one of the most relevant players in the world scenario. I think he's going to be that top tier kind of player, like Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo have been in the past years. I think he's that good.
Yeah, yeah, I think he's absolutely brilliant as well, and of course scored 2 goals against Osasuna just recently, wasn't it?
Yeah, and 2 goals
And
the week
now,
before. It's incredible. He's just reached that point of leadership that was expected from him. Simeone is being very, very tough on him, and I think it's part of the teaching process. He's come from Benfica, where he was allowed to do anything and not have any role in the defensive part of the game. And Simeone has kind of told him that recess is over, and that it's time to roll up his sleeves and get some defensive job done. It's impossible to be an Atletico player if you're not very aware of what your defensive task is. That's why Antoine Griezmann was so successful in Atletico, because he was the first player to attack, but also the first player to defend, and he was a very versatile player. And Joao Felix is reaching that point where he's starting to overshadow the memories of Antoine Griezmann.
Yeah. Oh wow, that's good. That's a high praise, of course,
Hmm.
as well. And that's as you mentioned there, the defensive work at Atletico. Every player knows it, and it gets drilled into them by Simeone. And that is exactly that Simeone and Atletico mindset is why I fear for Lokomotiv more in this game on the back of the buy-in results for each side. Simeone will have learned from the Bayern game and has already rectified that. I mean, Atleti have won what 3 games in a row now,
Hmm.
and in for Loko in the Bayern match, it was very much get behind that high line, and they had a huge amount of opportunities on the counter attack that they kind of wasted themselves, and they really could have scored more than the one goal. And that one goal was very well taken from Anton Milanchuk. Is there anybody that you fear from Lokomotiv's side?
Well, I think that it's more than anybody in particular, the team as a whole. If whether
Mm,
Nikolic has learned from past lessons that the way that he's been the way that Loco has been playing Atletico is not the path to follow. I think it's really easy uh, to draw a pattern of what type of teams um, are huge hiccups for Atletico. Teams that have that defend with 5 players in the defensive line. That's always a huge
mhm,
problem for Atletico because they really um, lose track of which players they have to follow and how to reorder the team that Christmas tree type of system that you were talking about before. If you have a 5 player defensive line, Atletico is going to struggle tremendously. It happens when Atletico played Villarreal at the beginning of the season. Villarreal is a highly offensive team, but they decided to go defensively against Atletico, and they walked away with a point from Atletico's stadium, and they could have walked away with the 3 points because um, uh, they had several opportunities to counterattack Atletico because the team just gets disordered and they really don't know um, how to face that type of rivals. It's curious that after so many years, it's always the same type of teams that provoke that type of problems. If Lokomotiv makes the same mistake as Atletico made against Bayer of trying to compete in terms of ball possession and try to artificially raise the pressing line, and they're not used to doing that um, in European matches. They might suffer against Atletico, but it all depends. I think that the case of Atletico's performance in away matches in Russia is still a huge question mark because I mean sometimes they perform in an outstanding manner as in against Lokomotiv. Sometimes they struggle tremendously.
yeah. And what are your expectations for Atleti in the Champions League in general this year? I presume knockout stages at the very least.
Yes, knockout stage maybe. I don't know if I have the feeling that Atletico Madrid is going to be a competitive side this year. I still think they're on their way back to being ultra competitive side. So
Mm,
I'm afraid that they won't have enough firepower to get to the last stages, to the last knockout stages. But anything that goes beyond or that matches reaching the last 8, it would be a success from in terms of what Atletico's expectations are. Anything that was falling in the first knockout stage or not even reaching knockout stage, that would be a disaster, both from the economical point of view and from the reputational point of view, because the expectation has grown incredibly for Atletico, and they have very similar expectations to other big sides in Spain. Like I wouldn't say exactly the same expectations at Real Madrid and Barcelona because they're expected to win everything every single season, which is absolutely ridiculous and paradoxical. Not all of them, because someone's going to fail, of course.
yeah.
But they do have an expectation of being competitive to the very end, and that's always the expectations for the fans. From the point of view of the board are only going to demand Simeone to get to the knockout stage and to qualify for the next Champions League. So from the point of the view of from the point of view of the board, um, the stakes aren't very high because that's they just want to cover cost and maybe make a small profit off of the Champions League stint. They're looking at it from a more business like perspective. From the point of view of the fans would be very disappointed if Atletico wasn't able to reach that at least last eight stage.
Yeah, and of course, Lokomotiv's expectations are the polar opposites. It's one of those things when you get a top tier elite European club and then a big club in a second tier league. But of course, Lokomotiv are in a second tier league in the RPL, and from Lokomotiv's perspective, it's all about just showing face against Bayern and Atletico, doing the fans proud, doing the team proud, doing themselves proud,
Mhm.
keeping it close, keeping themselves in the game, and then as much as they can try and push Salzburg for that third place. But I mean, to be quite honest, before the group stages had even started, myself and my colleagues at RFN, we had all kind of written Lokomotiv's hopes off because of who they had drawn against, and we've been pleasantly surprised by the performances. If the results haven't really went their way
Uh-huh.
yet, not entirely. So in discussing results, it's a little bit of a RFN tradition here that we always go for some predictions. So, what would your predictions be for the game on Tuesday?
Well, before we get there, I drew a blank when you asked me about the players in particular, and or I forgot to mention. Um, there is one player on Loco's squad that I've always loved. I don't know if he's currently very relevant for the team, but Krychowiak is an excellent player.
Mm,
He's one of my all time favorite players in midfield. When he was playing for Sevilla, he was just absolutely fantastic for them. I always I always had the expectation that whether Atletico could draw him towards their team. So I especially like Krychowiak. I don't know if he's playing very much for
yeah.
Lokomotiv. And regarding a score, very much in Atletico style, I would bet on a very close win, 0-1.
Hmm. So on first on Krychowiak, there has been he's been coming under quite a bit of pressure and some criticism back in his homeland in Poland for his performances for the national team, and we've actually had a few Polish journalists get in touch with members of the site and some of our writers in asking, well, how is he doing for Lokomotiv and how's he doing in Russia in general? And we're because he's terrible for Poland, and
Wow.
we're just replying quite surprised because he's been Lokomotiv's best player this season and is one of the best midfielders in the league. He's not always 100% defensively. He needs that destroyer next to him, and unfortunately, Lokomotiv's first choice ball winning midfielder, Dima Baranov, is out for the season with an ACL injury. But Krychowiak is one of the main reasons that makes Lokomotiv tick in attack, especially. Is always his sort of big thing in the last couple of years has been that stupendous long shot from
He's
wherever it is,
incredible, yeah.
and he's nearing double figures goals. He's been really a very effective player for Lokomotiv, both in domestically and of course with that experience that he's got. He is one of the reasons why Loko are performing better in Europe over the last couple of years than they did 3 to 4 years ago when they were truly abject. So he's been really good for Lokomotiv, and on my score prediction, I think I'd agree. I think I would go a low scoring 1-0. I think Logo showed that they aren't to be underestimated against Bayern this week, but Atletico should just have enough to continue their winning run. And they're really that the way that Atleti do business, the way that Simeone sets his teams up and gets his teams to play, I think Loco will struggle to try and find any space in behind on the counter attack like to try and do. And I think if they sit deep, it like they probably will. It could come to bite them in the foot.
Yes, I totally agree with your analysis.
Yeah, so that's it, everybody. So for all any Spanish speakers out there, Make sure you go and listen to Esto es Atleti and Maneras De Vivir. Ricky, where can everybody find yourself and your work online?
Well, I mean that's basically where I am, and on Maneras De Vivir, where we record a weekly show. We're currently repurposing Atleti for as a monthly publication. We're going to start publishing probably around December on a monthly basis. Um, a long read type of magazines format, just to change things a bit. We've been publishing the daily news, and we're going to change the way that Society publishes. And in terms of Twitter, you can find me at Ricky AM. That's my Twitter handle.
Yes, so once again, thank you for joining me, Ricky. And to all the listeners, just keep an eye out for the next episode of the RFN podcast, which will be out later on this week on Friday morning. And that will be reviewing the UCL action before a fortnight break in play as international football once again returns. But before that, there is, of course, one more round of Russian Premier League this weekend, and we will discuss all the previews for that on Friday. Bye for now.
Идет футбольный матч, летит над полем мяч. Веди его, беги, точнее его ударь. Но мяч берет с ноги решительный вратарь. Не напрасно футбольное поле самых ловких и смелых влечет. Здесь нужны тренировка и воля, быстрота, увлечение, расчет.